So anyway, the homeschooling thing, so my kids, I've got 8, 6, and 3.
That's cool.
So, and it's funny.
I've got a 10, 6, and 3, by the way.
So you're 10, 6, and 3. Okay. So you also are exhausted all the time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Man, isn't it funny how it's one of those things that you don't think you have to think about, and then all of a sudden it becomes relevant, and then you have to make that decision for your own life and family.
Yeah.
And I don't know, when I get up in churches or speak, I don't know if there's anything that people are more passionate about, it feels like, in the church right now than Christian education. Like, it is like a topic I did not expect to be so... Like, I one time I had someone ask that exact question, like, how do you feel about Christian education? Are you going to send your kids to public schools? And I told them, in the end of the day, I believe we're supposed to make our kids prepared, not safe. Yeah. But, right? Like, I think we want our kids to be ready. We want them, like I was saying in the beginning, like with the whole dichotomized reality of, I don't want to grow my kids up in a bubble only to then expose them to a world that's going to eat them alive.
Yeah.
But man, my 6-year-old is not a missionary. She should be learning about math, man, and science. Right. And I don't need my 6-year-old having to contend with, being educated on sort of liberal ideas of gender. And it's like, no, we've been blessed, like, to have people in our lives that have helped us to allow us to send our kids to a private Christian school. Cool. Nothing we could have done on our own as missionaries. Yeah. But no, I just don't, I feel very strongly. My wife felt it most strongly and in the beginning, but I just felt like it's either was going to be homeschooling, which neither of us had any skill or frankly desire to do, or something where they're not having to contend with those types of, frankly, indoctrinations. And so that's the route that we've gone so far. How do you feel about it?
Well, so what's interesting is my oldest, he's 10 now, like I said, but when he was 7, I think about 7, second grade, or is it third grade? Third grade is when his best friend at school told him he was an atheist. And would say that he doesn't believe that. As a 7-year-old? His 7-year-old told him he was an atheist. Goodness. And then, I know, which is crazy, right? And then later, come to find out that kid's dad is transitioning. He's transitioning into, going through his process too. So I had to have these conversations with him really early, you know what I mean? And so but what I thought was good about it is because I was able to talk with them, like kind of go through like some early apologetic type stuff a little bit, and also helping him to engage, with these different, people with different beliefs. So having him ask his friend questions like, why do you believe that God doesn't exist? You know what I mean? And he's just he just said that the universe, because at first I said like, where do you think the universe came from? You know what I mean? Just to see to get that kid to start thinking a little bit, And he said, he just thought it just popped into existence or whatever. And so then we started going through. So I said, even if for no other reason than for me to show him the relevance of using apologetics and understanding theology and these sorts of things in culture is still good, you see? And so my view is that and I'm with you. Here's where I would say, I think this depends on the parent and what they think is best for the kids.
Right.
But I think for me, like the way I think about it is like I want my kids to be able to be prepared, like you said, but you also don't want them to be indoctrinated in that sense too. But I think this is why it's so important for us to just spend so much time talking to our kids as much as we can. And it's hard. You have 3 kids just like me. It's hard, you know what I mean? Especially with everything else. But spending time with the kids, trying to get them to learn how to think well through these things, then they can be okay. Yeah. So my thinking is, so I agree with you. But for me, I'd rather keep them probably when they're early or when they're younger. I'm with you. It probably is better for them not to be around these sorts of things, But if they're going to be exposed to it anyway, we may as well help them be the salt and light in the world,
Yeah. It's a challenge, man. People are so passionate about this. And of course, given my upbringing and my context, my whole world has been trying to live like Jesus outside of the church, trying to represent him in a clear and relevant way. And so the last thing I want to do is raise sheltered kids. It's just, it's hard, man. It's like they got so much to deal with as it is. And, and like you said, every kid is different. Every context is different. And I definitely don't think, I would never like prescribe one thing, like this is the only right way. But I think for us, I just have felt blessed that our kids can, they're still kids, man. And like a lot of the families that went to this school, some of them went there because of COVID. They didn't want the restrictions. So you're still getting a lot of different world views, even though it's technically a Christian school. But you're right, man. I wrestle with that. I want my kids to ask all the hard questions. I want them to be able to doubt things. It's like the Tim Keller, someone without doubts is like a body without antibodies, right? You have no immunity. And so how can I, like you said, make it very okay for my kids as doubts inevitably emerge, whether it's peer pressure or just their own curious minds? How can I be like, let's talk about it. It's cool to feel this way, and let's get to the bottom of some good answers to these tough questions. So,
and one quick thing on that too is my oldest is a lot different than my middle. You know what I mean? Who's different than my youngest, and so like my oldest is a little bit more. He's a rule follower by nature. He loves rules. You know what I mean? He's good, he's responsible. But my middle one will always push it if he can. If he can get away with something, he'll do it. So I think even in that kind of context, it's like it's better for my older one. I trust a lot more, hearing these things than I do my younger one, because he's, you know what I mean? He's more impressionable, and he likes to follow around, and he likes to mess with people. And, so anyway, so those are the type of things to take in consideration as well, which is why I don't think there's a one size fits all for this. Yeah.
No. And, I do think another element to this conversation is just the role of friends, like how can you curate their friends? How involved can you be? I think of my own childhood, and I do feel like looking back, my parents probably influenced that a little bit more than I maybe consciously recognized. But that's another part of it, right? Like, man, friends are so crucial. And I guess if that's the pool of people that they're potentially drawing from, that is a scary thought too, depending on the context.
100%. Completely agree. Yeah.
Oh, it's funny because my middle is my firstborn is a firstborn rule follower, but doesn't at this point care very deeply about deep things. Like he's just sports. It's just I just want to chuck things and run. But then my middle is the asking the questions. Like, I mean, I'm sitting there in the car, and I've said this on this podcast before, but she's 5 at the time, and she's like, Dad, if God let Satan fall, like if then why wouldn't that just happen again in heaven? And I'm like,
good question. See,
I'm like, that is one of the hardest, craziest apologetic theological questions you could ever come up with. So she's my middle, she's my creative, but also a little challenging, not going to lie. So you're right. They don't come as one thing, and that makes this parenting thing all the more fun.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah.
So it's relevant because obviously your world is cultural apologetics. It's trying to interpret and understand the world at large through a Jesus lens. You have your YouTube channel that's really amazing. I draw on that all the time for insight and wisdom and inspiration. The whole What Do You Meme YouTube channel. So if you haven't heard of that, check it out. I'll put links everywhere, notes. Go check that out and subscribe. But what got you going down this path? Have you always been curious? What was your faith story? How did you become the powerful cultural apologist that you are today?
Man, honestly, it's not as linear as a lot of people's stories. I'll kind of give you a super condensed version. So I wasn't raised in a church going home or nothing like that. We didn't really talk about God or anything, hardly ever. And so when I'm trying not to skip over too much, I guess. But when I first got to college is when I really started wrestling with the idea of God a lot more. And I wanted to take a class on the world religions, but the world religion classes were all taken. And so I took, they said, well, you can take philosophy of religion. And at this point, I had no idea what philosophy was. Like, I was like, I have no idea what it is, but I was like, I'll give it a shot. And I started taking it. And that's when I first came across a lot of the arguments for God's existence. And the Kalam cosmological argument is the one that really solidified my belief in God's existence. Because prior to that, I was kind of agnostic a lot more. Like there was a lot of times when I believed a lot. And we were introduced to a church when we were 15, me and my twin brother, that was just like, it was really kind of like a cult. And so like, that was weird. And so after that, we were kind of like, I believe a lot, but then some days I'm just like, man, we're just all alone in this universe. There's nothing coming to help us or save us, And so eventually, though, in college is when I came across a lot of the arguments, and that made me I'm really confident that God existed. And then I came across evidence for the resurrection later because I was going to different churches trying to just kind of get all these different views of God and stuff. And I would study a little bit before I went to these different churches. So I studied like Scientology a little bit before I went there, the Mormon Church or Jehovah's Witness or whatever. And then eventually came across the arguments for the resurrection, found it really compelling. And so that's when I first became a Christian. And it was kind of like, it was just like, I guess when it came to the belief in God, I remember having this moment where I was like, I believe in God now. And it just kind of hit me because it was weird. But then when it came to Christianity, I really kind of wrestled with that on and off for really, honestly, a couple of years, kind of just like believing it and then challenging my beliefs, you know what I mean, by talking with people about it and that sort of thing. Come to about, I want to say about 10 years ago now, is when I lost my hearing in my 20s, just randomly. Yeah, my hearing I lost. Did you ever see that video on my channel or no?
I didn't even know that, man. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's old. Yeah, it's an old video. But yeah, so I lost my hearing just kind of randomly. And the doctors still to this day have no idea like what caused it. They said there's so much about hearing loss we still don't know. So they didn't know. So I lost almost all my hearing. I went to 10% left in this year and 15% in this year with my hearing left. Yeah, and I lost all of the highs and mids. So I can't hear really like consonants and those sorts of things, but I could hear vowels and that's it. But just really hard to communicate. Yeah. But when I went to go get my hearing checked, they said that my hearing loss was so significant that I couldn't get hearing aids at that point too. Because I was trying to wait it out too. By the way, I was like, I'm not getting hearing aids till I'm at least 40. I remember thinking that. I was like, no way, because I'm bald. I don't have a lot of hair. So anyway, so I had to get a cochlear implant surgery. I'm not sure if you've heard of those.
Yeah.
So it's just like a internal component that helps you hear, and then there's an external component that attaches to it through a magnet. So I had that, but it's not like a contact lens. So you can't just put it in and not put it on and then you can hear. You have to relearn how to hear all over again. It's a long process and it's really hard too. It's weird and draining because you have to focus really hard to try to learn how to hear sounds again. And you just can't recognize the noises. It's really hard to explain. So anyways, it took me about over a year before I could start hearing again. And in that time, I was in Facebook chat rooms a lot, debating atheists and stuff like that. And that's what kind of, it reignited that passion I had for like philosophy and apologetics and stuff. And then there was a guy in there. Sorry, I'm taking a long time. Almost done.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. This is fascinating. No rush.
Okay, cool. So there was a guy that was in one of the groups because I created a group for apologists to go debate a lot. And there was a guy in one of those debate groups from Australia. And he's like, you should start a YouTube channel. And at that time, I didn't really watch that much YouTube because YouTube wasn't as big as it is now. Right. And I was like, and he's like, I'm going to send you a camera. I'll just give it a shot. And so he bought me a camera, sent me the camera gear, gave it a shot. Yeah. And then here I am. So
it's crazy to think about life that way, right? Like just... so many things in your life are just one little decision here, one little decision there, taking that risk or responding to that invitation. Man, that's so scary with the hearing loss. I don't know if you saw the movie The Sound of Metal.
People always tell me about that one, but I've never watched it, but I always hear about it. Yeah.
I mean, I imagine it would hit you in a way that I couldn't possibly relate to. I mean, it's about this drummer and he just randomly loses his hearing and goes through the whole cochlear implant thing and through this process of denial. And it's really intense. It's really intense.
Yeah.
As a musician and as someone who really has no discernible skills outside of speaking, I am the least practical human being you'll ever meet. I got nothing else to offer. That's a scary, scary thought, man. I'm glad to hear that you are where you're at now today. So
I appreciate that, man. Cause I was doing music too before that and stuff. And it's the same sort of thing. That's why people always tell me, they're like, oh, it sounds like that movie, but the way I think about it too, is honestly, I believe God obviously allows everything for a reason, And so I think in that, if I didn't lose my hearing, I was wilding out and everything anyway too, you know what I mean? Be really wild and promiscuous and all these things. So like, God allowed that to slow me down, to recenter me, so that way I could, do this channel or whatever else, he wants to use me with. So
doesn't make it easy though, right?
No, but yeah.
So okay, so you have this channel, and how did you get it to the point that it is. I mean, it's like a very successful channel by, virtually, I don't know what the stats would be, but to get to a point that you're at is very rare. How did it grow? How did momentum add to it? I just love to hear more about that. And then obviously we can talk about some of the things that you engage with.
Yeah, of course. So initially when I started it, so as I said earlier a little bit, I started a apologetics group, on Facebook, where I try to find all of the best apologists I could find and then bring them all into a private group so that way they could help each other then we can go debate like atheists and stuff or whatever, but everybody can get help and answers there. And so through that, I met so many apologists and so many people, you know what I mean? And a lot of them, even like Cameron Bertuzzi from Capturing Christianity, I knew him way before he started his channel, and Adam Coleman from True ID, and a lot of them, like most of them, Tim McGrew, even a lot of the philosophers and William Lane Craig, I knew a lot of them earlier because of that. So that initially gave me a little bit of a boost. I had about 100 subscribers right when I started, right off the bat, so that helped. Then I met my friend David Wood, who's a good friend of mine. He wanted to have me do a project with him. And so he kind of recruited me for that. And he helped push my stuff a little bit to help me get a little bit more of a boost, about another 1,000 subs. And then since then, man, it's just, God, hard work, you know what I mean? You just got to work hard. You got to love what you do, because if you don't love it, it's just too hard to keep up on YouTube, because you won't make money for a long time. I wasn't even thinking I'd ever make money from YouTube, but if you're trying to do it for like money and those sorts of things, it just find something else, because this is the blood, sweat, and tears over the years, man, so you really got to be passionate. And then God, obviously, is going to be the one that's going to help grow it as well, too. So,
yeah. It's like the myth of the overnight success, right? They never see the blood, sweat, and tears and the commitment to it. So the channel centers most often around events and culture and how to understand those from a Jesus perspective. And you really bring, you not only analyze these stories so well, but you tie it into a proper way to think about it, and then a proper way to respond to it from a Jesus following perspective. What I'd be curious, just when you kind of were coming up in all this, it was sort of the maybe the new atheists. Was it kind of around that time? It feels like, right? So what in your mind has changed? How have you seen things change over the years from those days where it feels like debating was kind of the big thing, and it was the very sort of caustic atheists, and then the kind of counterbalance came with the Christian voices, the William Lane Craigs and others like him. How have you seen things change in culture, and how is this a unique challenge for Christians in this moment compared to maybe when you started?
Yeah, that's a good question. The way I think about it is what I'm sure how you kind of think about it too is we have to be good missionaries. You know what I mean? Just like, because Jesus could have, he could have just dropped the Bible from heaven on a string, but instead he came to meet us where we were at, eye to eye. And so I think that all the time is like, we have to be able to understand the culture. What are the things that their customs and traditions, that sort of thing. And also too, what language they speak, and so at the time when I first started my channel, it was all atheist stuff for probably the first year, responding to a lot of atheist stuff and that sort of thing. But then I started kind of thinking like, most people aren't atheists. Like, most people are probably like spiritual, or, they're friendly to spirituality in some sense. And so because of that, I'm like, God, I just want to be used wherever a need is, and so I did enjoy the atheist stuff too, and I thought, I felt like I had something to contribute to it too, like the angle and the way I kind of went about it. But I also thought that there was a larger need for people to understand the gospel as well too. And so I kind of drifted away from that and try to go more towards culture, and then trying to find different ways to give culture the gospel. So I think that to answer your question, because there was that time with the new atheists were really popular, but I started seeing them kind of lose a lot of kind of traction, and culture kind of didn't really like them, I don't think either, because they came off as jerks too. You know what I mean? And so because of that, I was like, well, it doesn't seem like they're having as much of a pull. This momentum's going to die down too, because there's nowhere else for them to really go. You're just saying God does not exist, but you're not replacing it with anything meaningful for people, you see? Right. And so because of that too, I was like, okay, they're not going to be around forever. And so because of that, and so after kind of thinking about that and stuff too, and then really want to give people the gospel, I kind of pivoted over towards culture, because that's what I think the need is now, is kind of like the broad pop culture, that sort of place. But who knows what things will change in the future as well too. I don't know now, but that's where I think culture is a lot different today than it was 6 years ago or whenever.
Yeah, no, I think the whole recognition that we are in a time, I think, in culture where we're very spiritually open. I think people are skeptical of institutional religion. That's what we often say. And yet at the same time, they're willing to discuss spiritual things. And I think when we approach people with that understanding that there is a, I had an interview scheduled with Preston Perry, and we're going to do it in September, but in his new book, I don't know if you've read his new book, but he talks about the idea that every heart has a cry. I love that idea that inside of everyone, there is this spiritual longing. They want to connect to something transcendent, and the sort of overly strawmanned, overly caustic new atheist, it maybe had a moment where people found that interesting and it was very inflammatory, but truthfully, it left them with sort of an empty nihilism. And like you said, like you're gonna take away this sort of basis for meaning and hope and purpose, and you're going to replace it with absolutely nothing. And I'm supposed to be okay with that. So no, I totally agree with you. I think having a recognition that people are spiritually hungry, and then finding ways to engage them in those places, I think is a crucial approach to culture today. But have you found that there are new challenges with that? Maybe there's such an openness that there is an unwillingness to commit or something. It's like, sure, everything's cool. What kind of new challenges do you think the time that we're living in presents? Even if the militant atheism had there was a unique way to approach them, right? But how do you approach someone who just says, everything's cool?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's different ways to answer that question. I guess one way to kind of think about it is, I think Jordan Peterson has really kind of shifted the cultural kind of consciousness when it comes to Christianity and religion in general. Because I think with him, the way he's kind of opened people's mind up to the idea of Christianity, even from like Joe Rogan. I mean, when Jordan Peterson came on the scene, it was a lot different than how it is now. And a lot of people like Andrew Tate's and all them started sounding more and more like Peterson when it comes to like at least the pragmatism that's behind, that Christianity, you can utilize Christianity for. And so because of that, there's a new openness there. But there's a catch that comes with it, is when it comes to the actual gospel message, that's where people tend to kind of want to, that's where those people don't go there. So like Jordan Peterson's, Andrew Tate's, or, even though Andrew Tate's Muslim now, but like a lot of those, Joe Rogan, they're like, Christianity's good, Elon Musk. But when it comes to the gospel message, so it's like, in my mind, the challenge there is to say, it's not just good for you. It's not just subjectively true for you, but it's also objectively true.
It's true.
And so that's the place where I'm trying to move people a lot of the time to say, like, yes, it's good for you. And yes, it solves these problems in your life, but it's not just that. It also solves the spiritual problem in your life, and it's objectively true for everybody. So that's one kind of way to think about it, where you see these unique challenges. Outside of that, I'd say when it comes to individuals, whenever I'm talking to people, I'm like a personality type junkie to some degree, not really, but I'm always looking into personality type stuff, because it really does help in evangelism, because you can start pinpointing where people tend to get their identity and value and meaning and purpose from, what type of things drive those things, how do they receive information, how do they reject information. And so because of that, I tend to personalize my approach to whoever I'm talking to when I'm doing evangelism, because I try to understand the world through their lens, their individual lens, so that way I can understand where their obstacles are, what's in their way, and then how I can get them to understand the gospel message fully.
Yeah. And I think so much of that is achieved just in the context of having genuine relationships outside of the church, right? Yeah. I think so much of my problem, frankly, is I'm busy, I'm cloistered, and I'm not very good at listening, right? I feel like how much of our problems as followers of Jesus would be solved by maintaining and then building genuine, authentic relationships outside of the church, becoming great at asking good questions, as you said, because questions are what unlocks their personality types or the things that they care about, their passions. If you ask someone, what keeps you up at night, or what would you change about the world if you could, or what are your greatest passions or fears? You ask those kinds of questions and really listen, they're going to start telling you what's going on, and you're going to be able to use that to have a spiritual conversation.
Yeah. And what's so important about that, I think, is whenever you start having conversations with people about God, it forces you to try to think deeper about your faith,
Yes.
even when it comes to the apologetics or theology or whatever. And with that, you grow closer in your relationship with God as well.
Yes.
So it doesn't just even work just for these other people, but it also helps you develop and grow your faith more. Because I think sometimes when I think about my channel, I'm like, if it wasn't for my channel, you know what I mean? How much would I be spending so much time thinking about this
Yes.
stuff? You know what I mean? And so
Yes.
it's like, that's why I see it as a blessing, because it really did help me really learn to internalize the gospel message and study so long for so many years on theology and stuff so I could truly understand it deeply, I feel like, you know what I mean? And so with that, it's like that's the benefit too of talking with people. And we tend to always want to segregate, it's like we're over here, the good Christian people, and
Yes.
then you have the evil, crazy, secular world. That's how they tend to kind of think about it and
Yes.
act as if they're just evil and you shouldn't have anything to do with them. But really, we need to be that salt and that light in the world rather than just trying to stay in our own isolated bubbles and not making disciples. We should be making disciples. So,
yeah. Yeah. And I love what you're saying about how you have orchestrated your life in such a way that almost compels you to become a person of depth, and how that selfishly really grows and sustains your faith as you're attempting to create, these opportunities for people to discover the truth. One of the things we do in our mission that I love is we'll go on the streets and do street interviews and ask people deep questions. And I was just texting with my videographer, and we haven't done it for a while. I'm up here in Minnesota, so we got about 6 months before we all just go underground and the weather kicks in. But I was just saying to him, like, speaking of personalities, my personality is like, man, give me 1,000 people on a stage, happy. But one-on-one, like, I'm awkward. I'm like socially, I'm like one of those introvert extrovert mixes. And so like, it gives me crazy anxiety, but it is so profound and rewarding. I was just texting, I was like, man, we got to do the street interview stuff again. We got to get out there because there is something about taking that risk and putting yourself in that position to ask those hard questions. Not only does God move, not only does the Holy Spirit move in those moments, but man, you become really adept at discerning the underlying questions, right? And you get good at connecting those responses to deeper apologetic themes. So if someone, they say they're passionate about art, you ask them, why do we do art? Like, what does that say about us as human beings that, unlike animals or any other living creature, we will devote ourselves to making something aesthetically pleasing? Does that really speak of just a random, purposeless, designless universe? Or does that speak to a God who himself is an artist and made us to do that? So
that's right.
I love
it's interesting.
that.
Oh yeah. And what's interesting about what you said is I'm the opposite kind of like you, because I'm good one-on-one with people typically. But whenever there's a camera in front of my face, whenever there's a crowd, I feel really uncomfortable every time, And so, but it's funny because like how God is using you in those ways, you know what I mean? Where it's like, it reminds me of Paul, you know what I mean? Where it's just like, you're weaker so he can be stronger. Because in those ways where you feel uncomfortable talking to people one-on-one, the Holy Spirit moves more. I feel like it's the same sort of thing too, whenever, talking to people in group settings and stuff, despite how super uncomfortable it makes me,
right?
You know what I mean? So I think that's funny.
It's funny how God will put you into a position where you can't but help give him the credit, right? Because you're like, I know who I am, but then you cheat every once in a while. Like this videographer that I'm talking about, he's like one of those weird kind of like Labrador kind of guys. He's friendly with everyone. He's an icebreaker, he just has none of that self kind of anxiety about meeting other people and opening conversations. And so I just partner with him. And I just say, all right, we got roles here. You break the ice and I'll come in with the deep parts of the conversation. So, I think God has mercy for kind of giving us what we need to be able to take those steps too.
That's right, man. Yeah. It's the body. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So one question I often have, there's so many angles I could go in, but one is, so you are always, digging into cultural issues, having to study them, having to get this right, because you're putting this out there, and you obviously are very cautious of saying things quickly, but also correctly, and also from a Jesus perspective. Yeah. I just was thinking about the whole Olympic thing, and, you have the opening ceremony, and then you got the boxer, and, how do we handle all this as followers of Jesus? Obviously, you have a unique job where you are always trying to engage with culture, but how do we not be? What is the line between being informed, being aware, forming opinions on things without also just drowning in this sea of constant controversy, constant information? Where I know it's a unique question to ask you because it's your job, but how do you find that balance of not just becoming overwhelmed by keeping up with the 20-second news cycle that we live in today?
That's a great question. And it is like sometimes it gets a little too much. Like, so what I personally do is I take a step back often, and it's really hard to keep those boundaries though. But it's like when I notice we're starting to get to me, especially like Twitter, there's no place like nastier than Twitter on the internet where it's like, it would just like, there's so much negativity, so much controversy, so many crazy things where it's like, man, the world, you just start getting super pessimistic and stuff. But I try to kind of watch that because one, it's not good for my marriage, because I'll carry that home, and try to create better boundaries with trying not to get too involved in it to some degree too. So I think that people need to be kind of discerning, understand yourself well enough to know like when it's going to be too much, when you need to take a step back, that sort of thing. But also, I mean, I guess you need to know your limits. It's like if I was a person who had a past of being addicted to drugs or something like that, I'm not going to be studying drug stuff, you know what I mean, all the time. Because, so it's like you kind of want to understand yourself well enough to kind of know where your limits are, I think. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Is that what you're looking to get in that?
No, totally. And I think part of what I'm wrestling with, because I engage in some of the spaces that you do, and part of what I'm also wrestling with is, well, it's connected to something you said earlier. You said that Jesus or God didn't just drop a Bible into culture. He engaged with people. And there would be some people in the Christian world who would say, well, you don't need to know all these things, and you don't need to keep up on all these things, and you just need to preach the gospel. We have the Bible and that's enough. And we need to not bother ourselves with all of this. You have extremes. And I don't agree with that. I see, Paul to the Athenians, I see Jesus being incredibly relevant. How do you balance cultural awareness with perennial truths? Maybe that's the most compact way to ask that question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So are you speaking more about the approach, or are you speaking
in your own life as a potential to be distracted, but maybe as a way to engage with people? Like, how much of it is a distraction, or how much of it is like, no, if I'm going to speak to these people in these times, I got to know the things they're wrestling with and dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially it. It's like, for me, I think like, and keep in mind too, like I've been a Christian for a long time too. And I understand what I believe, from the intellectual perspective. I've been through the emotional up and downs. Like, so when you go through all that and have that experience, this is where doubts are good in some ways, because there's a sunny side to doubt, which is where it can, like how you kind of said earlier, it can give you those antibodies, you know what I mean? So that way you can be able to withstand a lot of this stuff. Because a lot of people worry if they go engage with culture, they're going to end up like culture or something like that,
Right.
But I don't think that necessarily follows for everyone. But I also say this, because one thing I learned in life, because there's a lot of approaches that I don't like. Like, for example, when people are holding up signs or billboards, like turn or burn billboards, a lot of these approaches I don't like, but I used to be very critical about a lot of these different approaches. But what I found is I kept meeting people who God would reach them through these things. So like even my assistant, if I'm remembering correctly, I can't remember if this is how she converted or if it's what kind of snapped her into gear, but she saw a billboard sign, so I said, well, if God could use a billboard sign, then who am I to say that like this is the wrong way to approach? And so because of that, I now see all these different approaches as, there's some obviously that are going to reach some people and have more collateral damage than others, but I hold them pretty much open because I know God will still use these different approaches. So, so that's the way I kind of think about it. Like, I don't think that it's wrong to engage with culture. Like, I guess you kind of just balance out, but it's like you have to be able to try to be self-aware and understand what's going on, because I'm constantly always doing that. Like, God, is this for, let this not be about my ego and my glory. Let this be about you and your glory. You know what I mean? And there's those things that you have, noticing those deficiencies, keep praying about those and keep working on those, and try to, again, do a lot of self-talk where you just say, like, why am I getting defensive? I'm getting defensive because I'm trying to protect my ego. Am I trying to protect my ego, or is this about, illuminating the gospel message? Okay, well, it's about, illuminating gospel message so I can let my ego go. So a lot of those sorts of things. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah, no,
Again,
totally. Totally. So what would you say are, obviously you have harnessed the power of the internet very effectively. And I think we as followers of Jesus need to be there. But what do you see as, where could we go farther? How do you feel like Christians should be engaging on YouTube, on social media, and all of these places? And what would you say are the limits or the traps or the pitfalls? Like, is there a place the internet can't go? Are there needs it can't meet? And how do you see it as just part of the larger mission of God? Because obviously we all are just one part of what God is doing.
Sure.
How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, similar to kind of how you said, I think God has certain people in different places doing different things. And it's beautiful to see, because when I see pastors, a lot of the time, I'm like, there's no way I could do what they do. Like, thank God that he made people that are suited for that job, right? And at the same time, pastors will say that to me. They're like, oh, I can't believe that. There's no way I could do what you do, And so it's like, it's not, I think we need Christians everywhere putting in this work. You need the people on the streets. You need the people in the ghettos. You need the people in the suburbs. You need the people everywhere in these different ways. You know what I mean? So when it comes to the internet, I mean, honestly, I think it's really relative to what their mission is and where God can use them without them falling into the trap of the world. So for example, I wouldn't say I wouldn't do this, but I have no desire to do it. But say I went to go evangelize at a gay strip club. Now, because I'm not attracted to men at all, it's not a temptation point for me. Right. And therefore, if I'm evangelizing to those people, that's fine. But if it was like, some female strip club, me being heterosexual, then it's like, that would be a different issue. Yeah, exactly. And so, and it's like the same thing with an alcoholic going to a bar or whatever. And it's the same sort of thing on the internet. If there's these places where you find yourself feeling more radicalized for, say it's a political thing, I'm feeling more radicalized towards these politics than I am the gospel message, that's a problem. Maybe you should step back a little bit, or at least reevaluate, and see if God wants to use you in some other chat room, you know what I mean, or whatever. Yeah. So I think that we can be anywhere on the internet, but I just think that it has to be obviously wise, and, wherever God wants to use you, be open to it, even if it's somewhere you want to be and God doesn't want you to be there. Let it be his will, the best that you can.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it sounds like it comes down to calling, right? This isn't, and none of this is just, that sounds like a good idea. I think I'll do that, right? It's birthed ultimately, like you see in scripture, out of a desire to please God, and he orders your steps. And often it looks like a master plan, right? But you just kind of did the next thing in front of you, and you look up and it's a calling. And then of course, like every calling, it has its strengths and it has its limits, and none of it can function in isolation, right? The hand can't function without the leg and without the torso, and all of it's under the head that is Christ. And so that, I think, is ultimately what I think our tendency can be, to overvalue our role in the body and undervalue the roles of other people. And like you said, it's like, no, the only real mission is on the streets. No, the only real mission is in churches. No, it's like, no, it's all of it working together under one head.
Yeah, that's right. 100%. And like you said earlier too, it's like, people would say, hey, you just need to go preach the gospel. But like you said, in scripture, you know what I mean? You see that Paul, like you said, in Acts 17, you know what I mean? Yes. Even using their Greek gods, you know what I mean? Using the name of their Greek gods and quoting their poets and stuff like this in order to reach the people. So he's engaging even with the falsehoods of it and trying to use that in order to point people towards Christ and their need for a savior. So I think we do the same thing. So whatever people are passionate about, those sorts of things, sports, there's a need there. Try to evangelize through sports or whatever, there's always these needs all over. So
we just, in our mission, just say, what's your scene? We have a lot of art and music in our world, and so the word scene is often associated with that. But scene is just a group of people gathering around a particular interest. So my wife is a group fitness instructor at at a Lifetime, which is like a big chain. I don't know if I'm not sure where are you at actually? Where are you
in
guys?
Colorado.
Okay, right on.
Colorado. So we got them out here too.
Yep.
Yeah.
So she's a group fitness instructor, and she has this just flock of women that love her, like that take all of her classes and they just share their lives with her. And she's like, like she's like their therapist / group fitness instructor. And so that's a scene. That's a scene.
Yeah,
she doesn't have to go anywhere. She doesn't have to get on a boat and travel to a distant country. She's in a scene where God wants to use her. And so it's cool, man.
Speaking of scene, not too far off topic, but you look like Spencer Chamberlain. That is from Under Oath. You know who that is?
I know who that is. In fact, little fun fact, this is normally a 4-person podcast that includes my dad, David Pierce, and then our European director of our mission, Luke Greenwood. He has a British accent. We make fun of him the whole time. And then Chad Johnson is a guy that signed Under Oath.
Oh, that's funny.
He was an A&R guy for Tooth and Nail Records.
Tooth and Nail, yeah.
And we're talking, Amberlin, As Cities Burns, Me Without You, Under Oath. He's like the most famous person you've never heard of in the Christian music industry. That's a funny comparison.
That was the time back then. That was a different time, man.
Here's a more controversial fun fact. You ready for this one? So he came out with an interview about 7-8 years ago where he talked about how he abandoned his faith because some Christians were really mean to him, and and so I wrote this article for our blog or whatever about how, man, it's so tragic that happened, but man, you can't let bad Christians ruin your view of God. Like we're not following men, we're following God. And this thing blew up, probably the most viral thing. And he even tweeted it and was like, I don't know who this jerk is.
So you saying Spencer? Yeah, Spencer, right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's hilarious. I probably read that article too, probably. I'm assuming because I remember reading on it. So yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you just opened up an old wound there.
You're like, but we look alike, man.
Come on, man. We got to be kindred spirits here. And I wasn't even railing on the guy. I mean, the whole tone of the article was, man, it's terrible that Christians do that, like that we ruin it for people, but man, we can't be throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
He didn't like that very much.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what's next, man? Where do you see things going? How do you see the landscape of YouTube changing? Are people more open? Are they becoming less open? Where are things heading in your mind?
I notice, at least from my perception, things have gotten a lot more tribal as time goes on. So each year it seems like people are getting more and more tribal, which is making it harder because everybody's just getting isolated into more narrow echo chambers where they're not thinking out of, which is why I spend a lot of time trying to push those people out of that. And I know it drives people crazy. It annoys them. You know what I mean? But lately I've been way more worried about some of the Christian MAGA movement, whatever you want to call that.
Yes.
And so because of that, I spent probably a disproportionate amount of time trying to push people out of that and trying to refocus them back on Jesus. And I'm assuming that this is the case too with a lot of these different groups, because this is how the internet's been growing and developing, it seems like. So that's probably my biggest concern at the moment. I'm not sure what this is going to look like post-election, you know what I mean, that sort of thing. But
it's going to be an interesting few months.
Jeez. It is, man. So that's where I think people are going to be getting more and more in their kind of their bubbles. And so I think we have to work harder at trying to refocus, because anything can be an idol and they just keep coming. We'll find anything to turn into an idol. So it's like, you got to try to keep focusing people on Christ, the most that we can, because it's too easy to get distracted from it, so.
Do you feel like a thought I've been having recently, and I think what kind of brought it to the forefront was the whole Olympic opening ceremony shenanigans, and was it the Last Supper? Was it not the Last Supper? And I think it obviously was, and then they just didn't expect the reaction and then panicked because everyone freaked out. And I think what it was a reflection of is that they live in this boldly, unapologetically anti-Christian space, and they just thought nobody's going to care. They just thought, this is the world we live in, our little liberal art French world. We think this is hilarious, and everyone else will think this is hilarious too. But what it made me think is, it feels like there was this sort of reaction against fundamental Christianity that was in the name of tolerance, right? And it was trying to position itself as a non-view. We love everyone and we tolerate everyone. And it's not so much about a certain view, it's just the tolerance or toleration, if that's a word, of all views. Now it feels like we're entering into a phase where that mask is kind of coming down, and it feels like secularism is just saying, no, these are objective, non-negotiable precepts of our religion, and you have to adhere to them or you're out. Do you sense there's a bit more of a militancy to secularism than maybe in the sort of the post New Atheism, tolerance, everything goes phase? Because it feels that way to me a little bit.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I guess the way I look at it is it's always there. It just takes different shapes.
Sure.
You see what I mean? Because I think it was like that New Atheism movement. You know what I mean? And before that, you have like some of these liberation theologies or whatever. There's always these different type of reactions to things that create these things. You see what I mean? And that's what it creates at least a vacuum for these. The militism, that's probably not even a word, but the militism, okay, yeah, the militism to kind of kick in there. So that's my view. I think it typically, because even you think since the inception of the church, there's always a different cultural reason for people to kind of do that. And I think that that's probably just what comes with it, you know what I mean, to some degree. But it's an interesting time right now because you have so many of these non-Christians talking positively about Christianity, but that's mainly kind of centered around some of the political stuff. So because of that, people that are on the left are like, oh, Christianity is basically a right-wing, what's the things they call it, like racism or KKK, white supremacists or whatever. You know, they start associating Christianity with that, which creates a different kind of problem. You know what I mean? But it's all of these kind of things working together that keep creating these people that are being reactive in the opposite direction, causing more reactions, and everybody's getting further apart, you know?
Yeah. I remember someone saying the expression that our culture has and maybe continues to experience Trump lash, right? Where it's like it's like the sort of opposite and equal reaction to an extreme figure.
Yeah.
I do also feel like there's, in the vacuum that the New Atheists created, in this unwillingness to live in this nihilism, people are starting to grasp onto other ideologies and worldviews to give them meaning. So if it's environmentalism, or if it's a certain political movement, or if it's equality, whatever it is, we are people that need meaning. We are people that need purpose. We need a moral code. This idea that we can live in sort of suspended air and not have any of those things is just not true. Very few of us, as you said, are true nihilists, in the sense that I don't believe anything and I don't believe anything matters. And so I think it's just, it's scary in a sense, and it's sad in a sense, because people are latching onto these things that are ultimately just going to destroy them. But it's also an opportunity, because I think people are recognizing how bankrupt it is to simply think we're just these animals in a blind, mechanistic, universe. They don't want to accept that. And so they're latching onto something that can give them that sense of meaning. And I think followers of Jesus need to be in that space.
Yeah, and on that point too, Tim Keller talked about in his book on preaching, he talked about how he looks for these pressure points. So he's like, when they hold these, and I don't remember the terminology he uses, but I'm going to refer to them as like axiomatic beliefs or foundational beliefs. And there's these things that are accepted in culture without thinking, because they just feel axiomatic and properly basic. So those beliefs lead to these complications in their life. And so he says he's always looking for places to put pressure on those, to show people where it conflicts with what they thought that they were getting. And then that's where you can put the pressure on that, and then give them the alternative of the gospel, which is something that I'm always trying to do. You know what I mean? So, so I think that's the thing that we can use a lot of these things, because these things aren't going to fulfill people the way Jesus can. And so because of that, there's always going to be these issues that come, like from, I want freedom, but then freedom really kind of leads to the slavery of a different kind. You know what I mean? So looking for those things, putting pressure on it, and then showing them how Jesus can set them free in these different ways is, I think, a very good method for how we can do evangelism.
Yeah. Just almost having that confidence in knowing that misaligning from the truth is going to lead to chaos. Inevitably. and finding those points of chaos as they're attempting to live out of alignment with reality, because that's what they're doing.
That's right. Yeah.
Tim Keller, man, it's still sad. We lost him too soon. His books are, I underline books, and then there's his books, which is basically I have to find the spots I didn't underline because there's basically nothing. So what a brilliant man of God.
He's influenced me the most, I'd probably say, or one of the most for sure. Because I learned so much from him, even the igniting me to start going deeper into the gospel, and then understanding that and how he turns all his sermons into the gospel. It's the same sort of method I try to use on my channel, trying to turn all my videos into an opportunity for the gospel, So Keller is the one guy I wanted to meet, but I'll see him on the next side of eternity.
Yeah.
But you guys had him on, didn't you?
Somehow, some way, I don't know how we pulled it off. Maybe it was persistence too. And like my dad, who you'll need to meet at some point, is a wild dude, but he had this really bad habit of asking like really awkward jokes at the end of an episode, and I'm thinking he's not going to do it for Tim Keller, like certainly. And so we get through this really great conversation, and at the end, he's like, "What do you?" I don't even remember the analogy, but essentially the acronym stood for releasing lions in urban areas. So he just gave him the acronym, said, "What do you think about this initiative?" And Tim goes, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, it's the Releasing Lions in Urban Areas initiative. I just thought it'd be good. It would like get people to start questioning mortality and I don't.
I love that. That's hilarious.
He kind of got it, but he kind of thought it was just super dumb and weird too. And I'm like, geez, hey, at least he's his authentic self, no matter who he's talking to. So
that's right. I love that.
Hey,
that's
this
funny.
has been awesome. Out of respect for you, we can cut it off now. But this is great, man. And let me just say, like you said that you're attempting to incorporate the gospel into all of your content. I feel that, and you've impacted my life, honestly, and I know that you're impacting thousands of people. I'm so grateful that you're part of this body. I've been inspired by your work for sure, and I know and I believe that this is just the beginning. So, I'm really praying that God uses you way more powerfully in the next 10 years than he has in the last. And so keep doing what you're doing. We need you in this body, and I'm really, really grateful to be your brother in that sense. And let's keep on doing it, man. It's cool to see what God's doing in your life.
Thank you, man. No, I appreciate that. And same for you guys, man. Like, I just pray that God will continue to use you as he sees fit. I think you have a lot of potential too, man. Like, and I haven't seen a ton of your stuff. I just clicked on, a couple videos, but from what I've seen, dude, I was like, I like what you're doing. I like the direction you're going. And I think you have a skill for this too, man. So I pray that God continues to use you as he sees fit in this area as well, man. So I
just got to deal with 3 kids, man. I just have notes. No, it's hard. It's hard. And then, man, the YouTube thing is just, we've dabbled, we've tried, because we're doing so many million things, and it's just, it's just that persistence, like you said.
The persistence is the thing.
Going.
Yeah.
Especially when you don't
upload it regularly. Yeah. If you upload every week or something like that, I think it all fall into place. But it's tough that the consistency. It's tough. So.
Well,
got all these other things going. So
I'll just live vicariously through you then for a while.
There you go. That works for me, man.
Well, dude, thank you. Appreciate it. Well, blessings on your family, and hopefully we can find ways to connect, encourage each other, bless each other. I'd love to stay engaged with you, but I'll certainly be cheering you on from afar at the very least.